Hi class, how are you today? That's absolutely great! The learning target for today is to be able to solve absolute value equations and inequalities. On the scale, you're a 3 if you can solve absolute value equations and inequalities. You're a 2 if you can solve absolute value equations. You're a 1 if you can solve algebraic equations. And you're a 0 if you cannot solve algebraic equations. Let's get started. Alright, let's start off with the one on the left here. It's a basic absolute value equation. So we've got the absolute value of 2x minus 1 equals 5. So the way we do that is once you have the absolute value, that's these two bars on the outside here, you split it into two separate equations. One of these equations is going to be 2x minus 1 equals 5, and the other equation will be 2x minus 1 equals negative 5. And then you solve both equations as normally. So we add 1 to both sides, and we get 2x equals 6. Divide both sides by 2, and we get x equals 3. However, there's a second equation we also need to solve. You'll almost always get two answers for these. So add 1 to both sides, 2x equals negative 4, divide both sides by 2, and x equals negative 2. So we've got x equals 3, but also x equals negative 2. On this one on the right over here, we've got these absolute value bars, but the problem is that we've got more outside of them. So before we split it up into two equations, like we just did, we need to make it so just the absolute value is on the left side. So, first, we need to get rid of this 5. This 5 is being added to the negative 4 times the absolute value, so we need to get rid of this 5 first. So let's subtract 5 from both sides. And that's going to give us negative 4 times the absolute value of 3x plus 2. That stays exactly the way it was, equals negative 30. Then you're going to divide both sides by negative 4, and you're left with the absolute value of 3x plus 2 equals a positive 7.5. So we divided by negative 4 here because this negative 4 was right next to the absolute value. So just like with parentheses, this is multiplying. So we need to divide. Now we just have the absolute value here. We split it into two equations. 3x plus 2 equals 7.5, and 3x plus 2 equals negative 7.5. By the way, if you wanted to put this as 15 over 2 instead, that's perfectly fine. If you want to leave it as a fraction, that's also okay. Subtract 2 from both sides, and that'll give you 3x equals 5.5. Over here you'll get 3x equals negative 9.5. You can do them at the same time or different times. You're doing the same process, just with different numbers. Divide everything by 3. And that will give you x equals 5.5 over 3, which is not a nice number. The easiest way to get it is to multiply the top and the bottom here by 2. Just to get rid of this decimal. We don't want decimals in fractions. So we're just going to multiply the top and the bottom by 2, and we can do the same thing over here. And so this one here is going to be 11 over 6, which is a perfectly fine way to write your answer. And over here, we have x equals negative 19 over 6. And these are our two answers. Again, I know a lot of people don't like fractions, but sometimes that's what you get with answers. And it's a lot more likely when you're dealing with absolute values to get at least one fractional answer. So go ahead and leave your answers as fully reduced fractions. Now we've got some absolute value inequalities. So once again, on the left here, we have an absolute value, but then there's a plus 6 after it. So before we do anything else, we need to subtract 6 from both sides. We need to get the absolute value by itself on the left side. So the absolute value of 2x minus 4 is greater than 10. Then we can take these absolute value signs and we split it into two inequalities. 2x minus 4 is greater than 10, or 2x minus 4 is less than negative 10. The reason we do this or, and it's not saying you can do one or the other, you do have to do both, but the or is saying that 2x minus 4 is either greater than 10 or it's less than negative 10. We dealt with these back in the last section with inequalities. So whenever you have a greater than symbol after your absolute value, you split it into two inequalities with an or in between. Add 4 to both sides. 2x is greater than 14. Divide both sides by 2. X is greater than 7. Same thing over here. Add 4 to both sides. 2x is less than negative 6. Divide both sides by 2. X is less than negative 3. And the or is still there. Let's say we have 7 here and negative 3 over here, which by the way would put 0 here, just to have it. X is greater than 7, so an open circle and then shade to the right, or less than negative 3. Open circle, shade to the left. So this is combining a lot of what we learned in inequalities, just adding a little bit to it. Now with this one over here, we have the absolute value of 2/3 x plus 3 is less than or equal to 2. The absolute value is all on the left side, so we split it into two inequalities. 2/3 x plus 3 is less than or equal to 2, and 2/3 x plus 3 is greater than or equal to negative 2. Now when we had the greater than over on the left here, whenever you have greater than in front of an absolute value, you end up with an or. If you have a less than, you end up with an and. And less than or equal to is the same thing as saying less than when you're trying to find and or. So, and now we solve the inequalities. Subtract 3 from both sides, and we have 2/3 x is less than or equal to negative 1. Then, I know something people have a lot of trouble with, but we have these fractions. There's a few different things you can do, but the way I taught everyone is to get rid of the fractions first. You could have done it way up here if you wanted to, and that's perfectly fine, but you can also do it right now. Getting rid of the fractions, you multiply everything by the denominator. On the left, that cancels these out, and you're left with 2x is less than or equal to negative 3. Then divide both sides by 2, and you get x is less than or equal to negative 3/2, which is a perfectly acceptable answer. If you want it nicer to graph, x is less than or equal to negative 1.5. Same thing over here. Subtract 3. 2/3 x is greater than or equal to negative 5. Multiply both sides by 3. 2x is greater than or equal to negative 15. Again, that's because these 3's canceled. That's what happens. Divide both sides by 2. X is greater than or equal to negative 15 over 2, which is also negative 7.5. So that gives us a final answer of x is less than or equal to negative 1.5 and x is greater than or equal to negative 7.5. So since we're all in the negatives, let's put 0 here, negative 1, negative 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, negative 7, negative 8. That way, when we put our solid dot, because it's or equal to, it'll be right in between because it's 1.5, negative 1.5, and negative 7.5. And then since it's and, we shade in between. And now time for the sponge. You have 2 problems here. Number 1 is to solve the equation. So solve the absolute value equation. Again, you'll get 2 answers, as you should. And then on number 2, I want you to solve and graph the inequality, like we just did. That's it for the lesson. Once again, please make sure to take notes on the entire lesson. Attempt the sponge, both problems, get answers. Please take notes on everything. I think I said that already. Who cares? Make sure to take a picture of everything, including the sponge, submit it all to Google Classroom, and have a good night.